Hi everyone, and welcome to Legal Limelight. Today we have a super special guest and a wonderful topic that everyone has been asking us about. Today's topic is smart contracts, the basics for businesses and lawyers. Today we have a super special guest. Anne Rose is with me here today from Mischon de Reya. She's a managing associate in the commercial team and she co-leads the blockchain group at her firm. She has experience in advising on emerging technologies such as blockchain, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, data and privacy issues, and a wide range of IT and commercial contracts, including IP licenses, assignments, franchising, sponsorship agreements, and so much more. Her clients extend across a number of sectors with a focus on tech, sports, media, and retail. Anne was recognized by Legal 500 in 2020, noting her as a rising star for commercial contracts. She also is a smart contract expert and has an incredible background, which we're going to dive into today. Anne, thank you so much for speaking with me today on Legal Limelight.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're going to get right into it. What exactly are smart contracts?
So thank you. Smart contracts are digital contracts and they automatically self-execute when predetermined terms and conditions are satisfied. You don't even need distributed ledger technology, which I think often people get confused about. And I think the name is a slight misnomer, right? So smart contracts are neither smart and they're not actually contracts in the traditional sense in which terms are understood. And I wrote about this a little bit in a chapter I did in a book called Legal Tech, which you can get off Amazon. And so if you think about when you're looking at the smart element, it's just referring to that automation process, right? It's everything's automatic. And the fact that, the computer code has a degree of autonomy without recourse to human control. So if you think about it as like if X then Y functions like you have in Excel. And then the word contract can be interpreted to mean either a legal contract, enforceable in the courts of law, or it's an agreed chain of action that, although not enforceable in law, cannot be tampered with once it's actually started.
So this is the question that arises a lot in our field. Are they legal contracts and can they be legal contracts?
So they can be legal contracts, but they're not legal contracts per se. And I think it's really important to make a distinction between smart contracts and smart legal contracts. So for instance, it was last year in November, and the Law Commission in the UK published a report following their consultation, their call for evidence on smart contracts. And they basically said that, look, smart contracts can be smart legal contracts if certain conditions are met. So you have consideration, offer and acceptance, intention to create legal relations, and certainty. And these are the things that you need to think about. You also need to think about the overlap between the two, right? And think about the form of it. So they can take different forms. You can either have a smart contract where it's basically a contract recorded purely in code. So the code may be intended to both define the contractual obligations and perform them. Or you could have a natural language contract with automatic performance by code. Or you could also have a hybrid code and natural language contract.
Tell us more about the hybrid model.
Yes, that's really interesting. So you basically, some elements of the contract will be automatic. That could be, say, payment. And then other elements, you'll then have a written language contract that sits next to it. And when you're trying to have a look at some of the sort of issues that crop up, one of the key things that you really need to think about is think about what do you want that code to do? Do you want that to be legally enforceable? Or is it purely providing an automated process?
That's so interesting. So these are things that businesses and attorneys have to think about on the onset. So when we are advising clients or businesses are entering into deals, what are some of the points to consider whether or not you want to have a purely smart contract or a purely regular written contract or a hybrid?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think one of the key things is if you are using a hybrid, is actually thinking about having a natural language explanation of the code. So to include express terms detailing how that code is intended to operate. So for instance, is it as a legally binding agreement or you might actually also put natural language comments in the source code.
Okay.
So here the coder could include within the code itself comments that describe in a natural language purpose, the purpose of the code, and any algorithms that might be used to accomplish the purpose. And I think that is so important. And you might also maybe have a separate set of documents as well, which then really detail everything in full. So I think it's taking that step back and actually thinking about, okay, so if I am using code, making it really clear to outsiders what that code is intended to do and thinking about different ways in which you can go about it. So one of the pieces as well of advice that came out from the Commission's report is when you're looking at the interpretation of code, it will be determined by asking, what would the term mean to a reasonable person even with knowledge and understanding of the code? So it's like the reasonable bystander test, but it's like, what does a person who has knowledge of code, what would they reasonably interpret it to mean? And I think that raises so many questions from a legal perspective in terms of thinking about things in a slightly novel way. And certainly as well, from a consumer law perspective, very few people are actually able to understand code.
Tell us about your background and how it plays into your practice currently.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been learning to program since I was around 11. I started with website programming languages, so HTML, C++, Java, and I absolutely loved it. And I kind of went down this rabbit hole. And then when kind of Apple came out and kind of app development became a little bit more common, I got really involved in Swift and loved creating my own apps. And then suddenly when CryptoKitties came out, on Ethereum, oh my goodness. I was like, wow, I got to get involved in this. I've got to have a better understanding as well as how it all works. So that's when I started learning Solidity. And I really went down this rabbit hole and just kind of embraced the whole DLT technology, looking at different types of DLT as well. We don't just have blockchain, there's a directed acyclic graphs. There are so many different types of DLT, and I just fully embraced it and got really into nitty gritty. And one of the advantages of that as well is if I am advising clients on, for instance, just one example, you're looking at royalty sale mechanisms that's going to be enacted with regards to the sale, for instance, an NFT, which is a smart contract, and actually looking at the underlying code and being like, okay, look, what's actually written in that contract is not what it says here in Solidity. And making sure people are aware of this and really spending money on doing smart contract audits with proper professionals. So I found, for instance, certainly my role as a lawyer has changed. I like to call it like a transactional engineer, where I'm engaging with people from all across the business, not just the legal team, but the marketing team, the tech team, and then engaging as well with people who are actually going to be doing that audit as well.
Do you have any tips for attorneys who, like me, does not read code, does not know how to code? I've even watched some videos on YouTube to see if this was something I can learn to do, but it's a very, very technical. So what advice do you have for attorneys who don't know code? How can we properly advise clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're looking at, say, smart contracts specifically, it's taking a step back and being like, okay, why is the business doing this? Do they need to do it? Do they need to use a smart contract? And are we looking as well at a smart contract or a smart legal contract? And if we are looking at a smart legal contract, then thinking about some of those things that we raised earlier in terms of, okay, what sort of form is it taking? And making sure as well you have a natural language document that talks about how the code's working, or making sure there are comments that are being put within the source code, natural language comments, that is. And then it's kind of looking at as well, reinforcing, I think, the point for lawyers that normal contractual principles are still required for a smart contract to constitute a legal contract. And so you can still use all your wonderful skills that you've built up, and then it's just applying it to understand with the technology. And there's actually, I know I've talked about it a few times, but the Law Commission's advice in the UK, it is on smart contracts. It's really great. And there is an annex, it's called, I think it's an Annex 3, and it actually has a whole load of steps that like is a non-exhaustive list that parties want to think about to provide for in their smart legal contracts. And I think both lawyers can look at this and also businesses.
That's so interesting. And I'll include a link to that and also to the book that you referenced earlier.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. I should also say as well, I mean, as part of my work with the UK Jurisdictional Task Force, we published 2 reports. One was a legal statement on crypto assets and smart contracts, saying that crypto assets can be property and that smart contracts can be a legal contract. And that was back in 2019. And then last year, I published with the UK JT, we published digital dispute resolution rules, which is actually to try and help people solve disputes on chain.
Amazing, because you said the word, the jurisdiction, right? This is freaking a lot of attorneys out, a lot of businesses, because contracts are obviously jurisdictional, so is intellectual property. What is the landscape right now when it comes to jurisdiction of smart contracts?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting one, and I think that's one of the key things where that's why you do need a legal contract in place, or you need natural language terms which talk about how certain elements of that code are supposed to work.
Yes.
And you're exactly right. This is one of the key things as well that comes up all the time, and I think there are still issues to consider. And I think the report as well talks about that. And it talks about how, private international law as well will need to tackle the issue of digital location. And that by that we're talking about, the difficulty of ascribing real world locations to digital actions and objects. And I think this is a really interesting one as well, because we've seen a few instances of cases recently in the UK whereby, we've had one recently. It's like the Lavinia Osborne and others case, whereby they said an NFT they confirmed was a crypto asset and therefore property. And then it looks as well at the sorts of injunctions they're able to get as well within that. And there's a whole talk in the judgment as well about jurisdiction, apparently. But I haven't yet been able to see it because we're still waiting on Pelling J to publish it.
So interesting. I know attorneys who are in this space and want to learn have just been sitting, waiting. In the US, we're watching the Meta Birkins case.
Yes. And the Quentin Tarantino,
and the third is the StockX, Nike. And
I'm following them as well.
It's just so interesting. And this is why I wanted to bring you on. We had such a great conversation over the phone that I said, and we have to bring this public. We have to share this knowledge because you are really at the forefront of what's happening right now, and helping by writing the articles, being a part of that task force. You are impacting the way that we are advising and creating law.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important to say too that, so I set up a group, which we were talking about as well in our call. It's called Tech London Advocates Blockchain Legal and Regulatory Group. And I work with the Law Society, who published 2 reports. And the last one came out in January, looks at various issues involved in the space, where we're looking at IP issues, where we're looking at tax and so forth. And I think one of the reasons why I set it up is to really help legal practitioners who are working in this space to feel comfortable being able to advise on this, because you could be an amazing fraud lawyer, an amazing IP lawyer, and you're scared almost of working in this space and applying your knowledge to this area of technology, and actually making you feel comfortable to understand some of the issues that are associated with technology, and then being able to advise. And that's what I really would love all legal practitioners to feel, to feel comfortable dealing in this space.
Yeah, and that's why we're having these conversations too. I mean, in the NFT Web3 community, there's always this saying that we say, no one's an expert, really.
Absolutely.
The technology is moving so quickly that you may be an expert yesterday and now a novice today. So I hope that encourages other attorneys. I also liken it to the internet. I don't know the interworkings of the internet, but I know enough about the internet to be able to advise clients. And so whether or not we learn how to code or really understand the inner workings, I think having the basic understanding of the technology and how it applies to law, and also how the law will apply in the future, because right now it's taking creative lawyering. And one of the things we talked about, Anne, is right now I am advising clients, even if you do a smart contract and you want to have legal terms, I'm also advising to have those terms in a formal, separate written agreement. So this sort of hybrid model, and ensuring, of course, that the terms actually match what's in the smart contract. But that way, you go through the process, you actually will have that negotiation process in the traditional sense, and then you utilize smart contract technology to execute payments and some other trigger provisions that really the tech is revolutionary, including licensing payments. There's opportunities for this technology really to facilitate transactions. But I do think for people freaking out saying, oh, lawyers are going to be non-existent because of smart contracts, that is absolutely not the case. This is actually a very exciting new area for lawyers. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And it's also understanding the terms. And I think, you raise as well about licensing and royalty payments. And I think sometimes as well, people think, okay, well, let's say a very common one, like I think of it as almost like the eBay of NFTs is OpenSea. And sometimes people think everything happens automatically. But actually on OpenSea, the distribution of royalty at the time of secondary distribution is normally done off-chain.
Nice. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. When you go through their T's and C's and you are advising your clients and you're helping them, you're actually able to see all these things, actually kind of take them through exactly what happens and how it works. And I think that's also really very important. I think there's kind of lots of misnomers out there. And you rightly said as well, like a lot of people don't understand the ins and outs of the internet. And I think the same is true for consumers. Like they want to be able to have this amazing user interface when they are engaging in this space, whereby they don't actually have to understand the underlying workings of the technology which they're transacting with. They just want to be able to, for instance, buy their NFT, or interact and go into the metaverse. And I think that's so important.
And we're just scratching the surface. I mean, this technology, obviously, everything based in blockchain or even smart contracts that don't need to be on chain, all of these emerging technologies, we are literally scratching the surface. And I liken it to the internet in the 1990s, where the invention of the internet gave birth to opportunity and gave creatives and business men and women the opportunity to build incredible software and tech that we see today. Facebook couldn't have been created when the internet was invented. And that's where I think we are. I think we really are at the beginning. We're just seeing the first iteration with NFTs being more art type projects. And I think that this tech is really going to be more, one, user friendly, which will then make it more mainstream. And also too, I do think it's going to become very intertwined into our daily lives.
Oh, absolutely. I think sovereign identity has been around for a while, but I think as well that's going to become even more prevalent as well as people become more interested as well with the impact of their data and the use potentially of NFTs. Either, you could even have it as a passport. It's really, I mean, it'd be very interesting to see how this space develops. And I think as well, intertwined with that, not only thinking about how the space develops legally, commercially in our society, but also thinking about, cannot state enough, testing. You talked about some of the amazing projects, with the internet and how we expand, but that wouldn't happen, it wouldn't work if people weren't doing a lot of testing beforehand, doing proper smart contract audits, thinking about whether they need things like kill switch clauses to allow the creator to stop the code being executed and automatically directing the user to a corrected contract, for instance. And I think this is so important.
It's an exciting time. I hope this isn't freaking anyone out. I hope that by watching this video, everyone is you're interested. If you're watching this and you're here in however long we've been discussing, you are definitely someone who wants to learn. And I do want to get a little bit more technical now. If you're watching, stay with us. So we talked about what a smart contract is, whether they're legal contracts, can they overlap? I want to know now standards. Yes. The word standards keeps coming up. What are token standards and how do they interplay with smart contracts?
So it's a really interesting question. I think standards allow developers to build software that's compatible with other software, right? So, I mean, some people on this call may be familiar with ISO standards, which are information security standards. And there's quite a common one in the space, which is ISO 27001, which provides security for any kind of digital information. And in traditional tech, if two companies wish to have like their apps talk to each other, for instance, they'd have to make a custom API layer to interact between the two apps. Now, this would be a completely customized API and would not be reusable. And if the app wanted to talk to a third app, then another API layer has to be created. So if there was a standard in place, you don't have to do any additional work, right? Because the apps just communicate with one another. And with tokens, there are thousands and thousands of tokens. And sometimes without token standards, it's almost impossible for them to be able to communicate with each other. So if a wallet wants to communicate with multiple tokens, then it needs to create an interface for each and every token. And this is unscalable at the moment. And so there are standards so that a wallet service can implement one standard that then allows that service and interact with thousands of tokens. And it also means that your contract can easily trade with other token contracts. So many people will have heard on Ethereum blockchain, for instance, the NFT standard ERC-721. And that is basically sets out minimum criteria to be included in a smart contract. And that enables the trading, the sale, and the managing of an NFT. And there are so many different types of standards, and they all mean different things. But that is why they exist, and that's how they interact.
And I could sit and talk to you all day about smart contracts, blockchain, and NFTs, but I like to keep these very high level and informational. And then if people want more, follow Anne on all of her channels, which I will link below. But the last question I want to ask you for today, Anne, what are the top 3 things that businesses need to know about smart contracts?
Okay, I think the first one is ask yourself, do you actually need a smart contract? Then get yourself a great team of advisors, lawyers, people can help you with the technology if you need them. And then really as well, focus on spending your money on a smart contract audit if you're not creating the products yourself. And those are probably the 3 key things.
I love that. And okay, how if I'm a Web3 company or if I'm a business wanting to integrate smart contracts into my business, how can I find you and work with you?
Yeah, thank you. So I am on so many different channels, Discord, Twitter, everything. But I would actually say the one where I'm the most responsive on is LinkedIn. Okay, great. So I would say message me on LinkedIn or even send me an email to my work address, which is, you'll probably provide it, but it's ann.rose@mischon.com. And those two are probably the best ways to get in touch with me.
And thank you so much for coming on Legal Limelight today. I hope everyone found this fun and informational. And click on the links below, get Anne's book, stay connected, and we'll see you on the next Legal Limelight. Thanks again, Anne.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care. Bye. Bye.